for the invitation. I'm very much looking forward to this because I know that algorithms has been a topic that people here have been systematically pursuing for some time. So I'm very much looking forward to your feedback on this stuff. If you look at the social science literature and algorithms, what you find is that, of course, most of it is on the interaction between human beings. So I'm being filmed, that's why, and I get told off if I wander too much out, but so I also try not to block the screen. Most of it is on the interaction between human beings and algorithms. And of course that's a perfectly right and a proper focus. However, in the domain I'm studying, financial trading, an increasing amount of interaction is directly between algorithms. So in this contract that traders know by its ticker, the ES, more than half of all trading, and arguably this is possibly the single most important financial contract in the world, more than half of all trading is between algorithms. So that's the focus, the reason for taking seriously how algorithms interact. See if you've got the ticker. No, that still isn't working, so you have to press this. If you're talking about algorithms, of course, you should say what you mean by that sometimes rather slippery word, and that's the definition of algorithm that I'm using. So I'm interested in the algorithm not just as the abstract recipe, but as the material implementation of the abstract recipe in a concrete computer system. My specific sphere that I'm studying is high-frequency trading, or HFT, algorithms, but they're not the only form of algorithm to be found in financial markets. High-frequency trading is automated and ultra-fast, and typically involves very large volumes of individually small trades. And the focus, as already indicated, is how high-frequency trading algorithms interact with each other. Now, obviously, they also interact with human beings and with other types of algorithms, but that's too big a topic for one talk. The focus today is how they interact with each other. It might sound kind of slightly esoteric to be interested in that interaction, but there's a very nice model in the economics literature, which we can come back to later if you're interested, which suggests that the total prize at stake in what I'm going to call the simpler form of the interaction of high-frequency trading algorithms is of the order of $10 billion a year. So this is not that esoteric, really. The financial consequences of this are consequential. This is part of two talks that I'm giving. On Monday in Sociology, I'm going to be talking about the, as it were, the political economy of the interaction of algorithms. Today, it's more a science studies materiality. As I said, the interaction of algorithms is an important topic, but it's also a methodologically challenging one. You can't observe algorithms interacting with each other, at least you can't observe in any literal sort of sense. You can, to some extent, study it quantitatively, but the data has major deficiencies. It's typically not possible with the kind of data that's available to academic researchers to identify successive actions by the same algorithm. You can interview people, and that's what I've been doing, but many people simply cannot talk. And even those that do are not necessarily trustworthy witnesses to the behavior of their algorithms. They may be lying, but even if they're not lying, they may simply misunderstand how their algorithms behave. So there's a host of these methodological challenges. But there's also a bit of good luck, at least for me, in the topic, because there's a central divide in the world of high-frequency trading. It sounds like a kind of technical sort of divide. It's the divide between making and taking. There's a preliminary definition of what making and taking is here, but I'll come back to it in more detail as we go along. It's to make, to place an order that cannot immediately be executed. To take is to place an order that can immediately be executed. Now, it sounds kind of weird, but something as apparently mundane as that should be the central divide in a field. But it turns out to be a classic science studies divide that's on the one hand moral, at least in the view of some participants. This quotation from one of my interviewees: I tend to want to work at companies that are makers because I see the inherent evil in the takers, but also a cognitive divide. BQ, as you can tell, is on the maker side. CG is on the taker side, and he regards his side as the cognitively more sophisticated. So what I'm going to do is to do 5 things. I'm going to do them, to make sure we get time for discussion, I'm going to do them rather fast. Sometimes you speak too quickly, then you just become incomprehensible. So anybody, Massimo, perhaps I can leave you, say, Donald, just slow down if I seem to be going through things too quickly. So I'm going to do these 5 things. So this is the structure of what's going to follow. So to begin with, the material setting. These are a couple, I'm afraid you probably can't see those pictures very clearly. Those are pictures, a couple of the pictures you can find in the public domain of the offices of high-frequency trading firms, which are typically small enterprises. You can be a major high-frequency trading firm and have fewer than 150 staff. Some are internally quite strongly divided. They're strongly gendered, at least in the roles closer to trading. Nearly all of the people who are closer to trading in those firms are men. But trading does not actually materially take place in the offices that I showed you a moment ago. It takes place, and again, my apologies for the light in here is not great for display of pictures. It takes place in buildings such as this. This is a picture taken just south of the Chicago Loop of a data center called Cermak. Just to give you a little materiality, I'm not going to labor materiality theoretically, but materiality will be around in what I'm talking about here is a kind of material everything. Data centers are packed with tens of thousands of computers which generate huge amounts of heat, and the heat has to be taken out from the building. This tank contains 40 million litres of brine-like liquid which helps cool the Cermak data centre. The picture doesn't give you a sense of scale. This picture, if you notice the lorries down there, this gives you a sense of the scale of the building. It's important to the history of high-frequency trading. The single biggest episode of disruption in automated financial markets began in this building, among the computers in that building. But that's actually not the reason why it's my favorite data center. The reason is that it's this building. It's Donnelly & Sons Calumet plant, which was the biggest printing works in the United States, probably the biggest printing works in the entire world. It's where the Sayers Roebuck catalogue, for example, was printed, where the telephone directories were printed, and it's been repurposed as a computer data center. And there's all sorts of features of it that actually transferred over, like there are 21 giant shafts running vertically through the building, bigger than my outstretched arms, which is where I'm sorry, some people have heard this already. I love this place so much. This is where the giant reams of paper were raised and lowered, and it's perfect for the wiring to connect up the data, the servers of computer trading firms and of the exchanges in Cermak. It's not the only data center in the United States, though. As I said, it's my favorite one. There are 8 others. 7 of them are shown in my map here. There's another couple that aren't shown in the map. 9 buildings in the United States host the vast majority of the financial trading that goes on in this country. Around 24 buildings worldwide host the vast majority of the world's trading. So it's those buildings that are the material context. Those buildings and the links among the buildings are the material context of high-frequency trading. And if you look inside a data center, again, you'll not see this very clearly, but it's a messy kind of picture. There's an enormous complication of wiring inside a building of that sort. But let's simplify it, and there's a handout. There's kind of 2 technical things that I need to put across in this talk, and here comes the first of them. This is how a trading algorithm acts. So up here is the computer system of, let's call it, trading firm A. This is in a building, either in Cermak or in a building such as Cermak, and it acts by essentially doing one of 2 things. It either sends an order or it cancels an order, and it does so by sending a message to the exchange's matching engine, which I shall explain in a second, via an order gateway. So the order gateway is the outer portal of the exchange's computer system. The matching engine is the core of the exchange's computer system. So it acts via the matching engine, and it observes via a feedback loop where not just its own orders, but all the other orders and cancellations and executions are reported by the exchange's data feed. So each of the exchanges has one or more feed servers that send out a constant stream of updates to the order book. What the matching engine does, and this is the other technical thing that I need to explain, what the matching engine does is maintain the order book. And here, and again, my apologies because this won't be very clear to you, but this is on the other side of the handout. This is an example of an order book. There are prices here going up from $29.45 to $29.54 at the top. On this side are the offers to sell. On that side are the bids to buy. The matching engine keeps this data file in good order, so to speak. And when it finds a bid and an offer that match, in other words, are at the same price, it executes that as a transaction between the two participants that have sent in the orders. And this is the more detailed explanation of the difference between to make and to take. So the highest priced bids are at $29.49 and the lowest price offers at $29.50. If an algorithm sends in a bid to buy at $29.49, the matching engine cannot find a match, it cannot execute that bid, so it will simply add the bid to the time order queue of bids at that price. That's a making order. If, on the other hand, an order comes in to buy at $29.50, the matching engine can match because there are offers at that price. So there's a near immediate transaction, and that's what's called a taking order. Part of the reason for the terminology of taking is that that order removes existing orders from the order book because they've now been matched, whereas the lower priced bid adds to the order book. It's that, in that sense, it makes. There's a systematic form of making that's very important for what's going to follow, and that's what's called market making. And what market making is that you both bid to buy and offer to sell at, of course, slightly different prices. The offer to sell is at a slightly higher price than the bid to buy. So in my diagram, this bid to buy 100 shares and this offer to sell 100 shares at $29.49 and $29.50 might have been placed by the same market making algorithm. And the goal of the market making algorithm is, of course, to earn the 1 cent difference, plus in some cases exchanges pay incentives to makers that the making algorithm can capture. So how does an algorithm do it? Well, first of all, it's got to carefully manage its inventory. It doesn't want to buy a whole bunch of shares or sell a whole bunch of shares, because that would give it a trading position that's risky if prices move. So a market-making algorithm tries to keep its inventory reasonably low, not completely low, but reasonably low. And it also, almost always, there are one or two exceptions to this, tries to predict how market prices are going to move. It does this via a set of signals which are data patterns that have predictive value, and the talk on Monday in sociology is going to be about the political economy of those signals. But just to slightly anticipate, the typical signal is that the prices in the two Chicago data centers, Cermak and the Chicago Mercantile Exchange's data center in Aurora in the western suburbs of Chicago, typically move a fraction of a second before prices in the share trading data centers in New Jersey. So if you're an algorithm in one of those New Jersey data centers, you get this material signal. And again on Monday I'll talk about the materiality of its transmission. You get this material signal coming from Chicago that's helpful to you in predicting prices. And if you're a market-making algorithm, what you try to do is to get out of the way, as participants would call it. In other words, to cancel bids and offers that are wrongly priced in the light of the incoming signal and that are stale, as market participants would put it. There's a set of different signals of this kind. To guide the action of the algorithm, those have to be condensed down to a single number. They've got to be squashed. And typically this is done, at least in the making side of my divide, by what's in effect a linear regression equation, where the various signals are the independent variables and the dependent variable is a short-term prediction of the price of the instrument being traded. Linear regression is actually quite an interesting topic in this area. There's a firm called XTX Markets that flaunts its commitment to linear regression. I thought when I first heard of it, that was just one of the quasi-acronyms that are common in the business world. But then I actually saw it etched in glass, and I realized, ooh, something's gone very badly wrong with how that's appearing on the slide. That is X superscript T multiplied by X. So it's, and the sociologists among you are nodding because, of course, you know your general linear model. That's a multiplication of a data matrix by its transpose, fundamental operation in linear regression. So this is, of course, a bit of an insider's joke, but it's also a flag of commitment to that form of automated reasoning. But the divide is a moral one, at least in some participants' eyes, not just a cognitive, technical one. One of my interviewees told me about an episode in her automated market making firm at the height of the financial crisis of 2008. One of the software developers had left the firm saying he could not look his grandmother in the eye and say he worked in finance, and that he'd done so was common knowledge in the firm. So the chief executive of the firm pulled the whole firm together on the trading floor and said to them, I'm going to tell you why you can look your grandmother in the eye, because we're market makers. We provide liquidity. So the reference there, again, this is my slide of market making coming back up, is that market making inherits the legitimacy of a traditional human role, because of course there have been human market makers, not just algorithmic market makers. And what a market maker does is to stand ready both to sell the instrument being traded and to buy the instrument being traded. So someone who wants to trade immediately doesn't have to wait for another investor who's got the opposite interest. They can transact immediately with the market maker. And that, as I said, traditionally has been viewed as a valuable, legitimate role. And that particular story is not unique. This is another interviewee who actually shifted his automated market-making firm to a taking strategy, but reports resistance from his colleagues. Ask them, do we market take? No, 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 as if you asked them if they would stab their sister. So let's then spend a few minutes on what's other to market making, which, as you already know, is taking. And that's, just to repeat, an entering an order that can immediately be matched. So again here, there are offers to sell at $29.50, so a bid to buy at $29.50 is a taking order. It can be executed straight away. There's a certain sense in which it's puzzling that this should be such a central matter, because all we're talking about is the difference between a bid to buy, in the case of my example, at $29.49, and a bid to buy at $29.50, which is of course a very, very small difference in price. And I must admit, when I started doing this research, I would have expected to find that algorithms would both make and take, that people would write taking algorithms and write making algorithms, and that firms would always do both. But that's not what I've actually found. I found very strong differentiation among algorithms themselves, among the individuals, among trading groups, and indeed often among entire firms, although some firms are compartmentalized. But the compartmentalized firms, this is a quotation from someone who runs a compartmentalized firm, because I was asking him, well, do you simply have groups that make and groups that take, or do you have groups that do both? And he said, no, I don't really have groups that do both. It doesn't entirely work to have a group that does both. I'll unpack this a little bit, because it sounds occasionally having an opinion all the time. Having an opinion all the time refers to market making. Occasionally having an opinion refers to market taking. The point of him saying that is that a market maker keeps bids and offers in the market all the time, and therefore has to have an opinion all the time. But an opinion actually trivializes it. It has to have an ultra-reliable software system that continuously monitors market prices and never crashes. One of my interviewees, the same one who told me the story of the looking your grandmother in the eye, told me about what happened to her firm, which is a market-making firm. Its system did crash. It was doing automated trading of options, and in the options market at that point, there was a heartbeat system. Every 10 seconds, the trading firm's system would send a message to the exchange, basically saying, yes, I'm still here, I'm still alive, and if it didn't, if that message didn't come through, then the exchange system would remove all its bids and offers from the order book. Her system crashed. The heartbeat system did work, but in the 10 seconds, her firm had lost $1 million. So that's having an opinion all the time means having a system that doesn't do that, that doesn't crash. It's a very demanding technological task, whereas occasionally having an opinion, that's taking. Most of the time, a taking system does nothing whatsoever. It just sits there, waiting for a signal that tells it it's profitable to take. The same interview you told me about losing $1 million draws the analogy with predator and prey in the animal world. Predators, she points out, have long sleeps. So if you go to a zoo, you want to see the tigers or the lions. Most of the time, you find the tigers and the lions fast asleep, because they can do that. Whereas if you're a prey animal, you can't afford to sleep. So that's the analogy. The maker is the prey, the taker is the predator. So if you've got one of these ultra-reliable technical systems, fashioned to control inventory, fashioned not to have stale offers picked off, if you've got the kind of technical system that a making firm has, trying to get it to take is quite a demanding thing. So another of my interviewees, working for one of the world's biggest making firms, thought he would experiment with taking strategies and found that really quite difficult, because he had to constantly fight against the logic of the system. He said you could do it, but you'd get right in there and rework the code in order to be able to take with an algorithm whose priorities were making. There are a variety of styles of taking. One is to find unusual non-standard signals, but for reasons of time I will simply set that aside. The second, and the more consequential from the viewpoint of the interaction between algorithms, is a taking algorithm that tries to get a standard signal, but to get it ultra fast and to execute against the bids and offers placed by making algorithms before the making algorithm has a chance to cancel those bids and offers. In other words, in traders' terminology, the taking algorithm seeks to pick off the stale quotes of the making algorithm. It's a very simple, machinic form of interaction, but it explains the central technological dynamic of high-frequency trading, which, as Budish and colleagues point out, is the dynamic of an arms race. Because ultra-fast taking algorithms mean that making algorithms also have to be ultra-fast. And ultra-fast here means reacting to a standard signal in less than a microsecond, less than a millionth of a second. And just, because you need something to pin that sort of number down. Light in free space travels 300 meters in a microsecond. So that's how short a microsecond is. And that is the simple form of the interaction between making algorithms and taking algorithms. Very simple, as you can see, but hugely consequential. It's all, of course, a material system. And again, the people who are here at lunchtime will have heard a little bit about this, so my apologies for repeating myself, but I love it too much not to repeat it. So the fastest form of, indeed, Marion, you're going to hear this, I'm afraid, on Monday as well, so third time. The fastest form of getting a price from the Chicago futures market to the New Jersey share trading data center is microwave, because signal passed through the atmosphere goes at almost the speed of light in free space, whereas if you go through a fiber optic cable, you're going at only roughly 2/3 of the speed of light in free space. But microwaves can be disrupted by rain. Rains heavily enough, the microwave links go down, and the pattern of the interaction of high-frequency trading algorithms is then altered. The making firms, by and large, use a microwave system created by the Paris-based McKay brothers, which they're technology suppliers. They don't themselves do high-frequency trading. They've created an ultrafast link between Chicago and New Jersey, and the making firms buy bandwidth or get data from McKay brothers. But now imagine that it's raining in Ohio or Pennsylvania, and the McKay brothers link goes down. The making firms cannot know that the other two ultra-fast links, which are owned directly by high-frequency trading companies, particularly by companies that specialize in taking, the making firms can't know with certainty. Probably those links have gone down as well, but they don't know with certainty that they've gone down as well. So I'm told they have to program their algorithms that when it starts to rain and the McKay brothers link is lost, they increase the difference in price between the bids to buy and the offers to sell. So that's the simple form, but I hope I've shown you that, simple though it is, it's actually really rather interesting, the simple form of interaction between making and taking algorithms. I'll end with the more complex form of interaction, which arises from the fact that some taking algorithms seek to anticipate and exploit deterministic behavior by making algorithms. There's a variety of ways of doing it. In a sense, the grossest, which was reasonably prevalent in the futures market, but is no longer prevalent because it's probably the case that it would now be regarded as a breach of the law to do this, is for an algorithm to post a large series of big orders, for example, bids to buy, which then fools other algorithms to join in with their own bids to buy, and then the taking algorithm flips, as a market participant would call it. In other words, it executes against all those bids, causing, on the one hand, the placers of those bids to now have an uncomfortably large inventory, but also for market prices to fall. So typically, those algorithms that have been caught hit a risk limit. So what they have to do is, I'm sorry for the rather crude word, but this is how traders talk about it, those algorithms then have to puke. They have to liquidate their trading position at whatever price they can get. So that's a predictable form of behavior triggered by deliberate action by a taking algorithm. But that's aggregate behavior. In a sense, a more interesting form of sophisticated interaction involves the de-anonymization of the order book, because electronic order books in almost all modern markets are anonymous. So, you know that there's that there's a bid to buy at $29.49, but it doesn't come with a label saying which firm or algorithm or trading account has placed the bid. But if you can work out which algorithm has placed which order, which algorithm has received which executions, and you can identify this pattern of repeated behavior. You can work out, for example, when a market-making algorithm is close to an inventory limit, and when it will have to change its behavior because of that limit, particularly if you know that what it's doing is combining standard signals via linear regression, because linear regression is actually quite easy to understand what the effect of changes in the different signals going into the regression equation are likely to cause in terms of the dependent variable. There's then predictable behavior that can be exploited. Human beings can actually do that. They can actually, if they spend long enough studying order books and the pattern and sizes and times of bids and offers, to some extent. I was speaking to a guy only earlier this week in Chicago who had spent lots and lots of time looking for the signature of particular algorithms in the noise of order books. Just intense human study. But increasingly, it's possible to do it more technologically than that because of improvements to exchange technologies. First of all, improvements to the synchronization of the measurement of time, because a signal is a temporal kind of thing. You need to be able to understand a signal. There's typically 2 points. You need to be sure that the clocks are coordinated at each end. So I mean, Peter Gallison rears his head at this point of the talk for the historians of science here. Clock coordination is a fundamental aspect of high frequency trading. And then secondly, something which from the viewpoint of any technologist is an improvement to exchange systems, an increase in the determinism of those systems, or putting it the other way around, a reduction in jitter, in random fluctuation. So better time measurement, coordinated time measurement, and reduced jitter makes it easier to identify the action of specific algorithms. it's not, I shouldn't make it sound as if it's straightforward, because it's not one of the firms that does this is said, I mean, this is the sort of thing people say and you never know whether it's true or not, but it's, you know, it's said, and it certainly means it has got a very big computer grid, one of the top 10 grids in the world, as big as NASA's, and it most certainly has equations that need to be run all weekend to estimate the parameters. You can't do this kind of thing by regression. It needs more modern forms of machine learning to do it. There's an ironic, and I'm going to end at this point, there's, as the clock is ringing, there's an, you know, precise timekeeping, I've learned in this sphere, is very important. There's an ironic reflexive sting in the tail. Because, of course, if you're a sociologist of the interaction of algorithms, you don't want really to be reliant on human testimony. You want to be able to de-anonymize the order book, to identify successive actions by the same algorithm. But that, of course, is precisely what the quote-unquote evil taking firms are doing. Okay, that's it. I'll stop at that point. Yeah. Well, will you keep